Hey up, how's it going? It's Matt, you're listening to Looking Sideways Action Sports Podcast. It's a show where I try and uncover the most fascinating stories in action sports and other related endeavours. Thanks for tuning into this episode, hope you enjoy it. I sure did, because I finally got to chat to the great Matt Warshaw, who's somebody I've wanted to get on the show for a good few years now. That's about how long we've been talking, actually, come to think of it. So it was great to finally meet Matt properly via the virtual means of Google Hangouts this time and have the following conversation with him. And it was everything that I hoped it would be. We're in lifer territory with this one, something that regular listeners will understand and hopefully be looking forward to. These episodes are always hugely popular with listeners because they provide an insight into how guests that aren't the big names, they're not the big pros, but they're equally as interesting and as important to the culture, have carved out strange and unique careers in the industry for themselves. And in Matt's case, we really are in lifer territory, not only because he's been working in this game for, well, most of his life as a surfer, journalist and writer, but because of his Encyclopaedia of Surfing project, which is perhaps the ultimate lifer project. As the name suggests, the Encyclopaedia of Surfing is Matt's Sisyphean attempt to document the history of surfing through the site of the same name. This is Dr. Johnson right in the dictionary territory, if you ask me. And to call this project a labour of love or a life's work would be to do it a grave injustice, which is something that I just did. This is a truly quixotic undertaking. Yes, I am rummaging around in the bag of adjectives for this one, that in essence can never be completed. And from speaking to him, I think Matt is completely happy with that reality. And, you know, if you ask me, it's what makes this project so unique and brilliant. Because with the Encyclopaedia of Surfing, surfing has found the perfect custodian of its culture and history, and Matt has found the perfect vehicle through which to make a living by dedicating himself to his life's passion, surfing and surf culture and history. It's the living embodiment of the 1,000 true fans theory of art and creativity, something we discussed in this episode. And in its Borgesian infinity, there's something truly surreal yet pure about the entire undertaking. So that's what we chatted about in a conversation that, like a river slowly making its way across the floodplain, meandered in its own slow, purposeful way. And I enjoyed it very much, as you can probably tell. We also chatted about not surfing, Matt's view that wave pools are undermining something essential at the heart of the culture, the importance of doing work you believe in for the sake of it, and plenty of other classic Looking Sideways themes. You might even call it a deep dive. Yeah, it's a good one, this. Grab a brew, settle back. Here's me and Matt Warshaw. Enjoy. What a pleasure to finally meet you after all this back and forth and, email chat. It's a real pleasure. Thank you. Thanks so much for doing it.
Very much my pleasure, Matt. And who was the most colossally unprepared person you think you've ever had to do a pod with?
That is a really good question, actually. It's normally me, because I normally try and know enough to have something to talk about. But it's really common, when people basically say, like, I say, have you listened, and they're like, yeah, I don't know. Let's just have a chat. Eh?
I just feel like I'm still competitive enough to want to do one better than whoever the least prepared person was. So that's what I'm shooting for here. But between everything that's happening in the world, and between me looking after my 10-year-old, and between me not having been in the water for as long as I have, there were so many things that I hadn't done to get ready for this that I just sort of gave up. And so let's just talk.
Yeah, I quite like that though. I quite like the fact it's become, because the way I approach this is very much like, let's just have a chat. It's not like I'm approaching this as like a super, here's my list of questions and all that. And like you say, you've obviously had a very, very hectic few months. So how are you getting on with that?
Well, I suppose everyone's had a hectic few months, right? I mean, what happened in the last few months that, I don't know what it was. But my fourth grader was sent home from school along with all the other fourth graders and all the other kids in Seattle and across the country and across the world. So that was interesting, and that's actually been kind of great. I like having him around. My wife works at home. She works at Amazon. So we just remodeled our basement about a year ago. So it really quickly kind of worked out where my wife is set up in the basement part of the house, and
Nice.
then Teddy's mostly on the ground floor, and then I have the top floor, right? So everyone's sort of doing their thing, and Teddy's on his school Zoom calls, and Jody's down keeping us all in clothed and fed and insured, and I'm up here with my little hobby website. And then every 45 minutes or an hour, someone will shout out, "Hey, let's go for a walk." And then, one, two, or three of us will head out into the neighborhood and go for a walk. And I live in this, beautiful neighborhood that, as far as I can tell, kind of hasn't been touched in the least by what's happening out in the world. Here in Seattle, a neighborhood called Queen Anne. And it's been very strange. It's been a really weird bubble in that I'm constantly, like, to a point of having my brain overheated, just reading about the virus and about, American politics and all that, and just always sort of at the edge of my seat. And then we leave the front door and hang a right and go for a walk, and everything in this neighborhood couldn't look or be any nicer. There's no cars, there's no planes overhead. There's a few now, but it's really quiet. Everybody's out working on their yards because everyone's home. And I think because it feels like even though it's not here, it still feels like a crisis, and everyone's being extra nice to everybody. So we just go for these walks, and it's just been it's really oddly peaceful in this neighborhood I'm in. And then I come back in and read the headlines again and get all worked up, and then I go work on Encyclopaedia or work on the website, and that is my escape from everything. So it's been a strange period, and no end in sight, right?
Yeah, I think you just described it. The way you've described it, I think, is probably really common for so many people. I mean, even down to the arrangements that you described with your family, because me and my wife have got a really similar setup, which is hilarious. Like, we didn't quite have it dialed in the way that you guys obviously had it dialed, but as the weeks have gone on, I've ended up in the shed, which is where I am now. So the shed is now like my work studio space, which is brilliant, which is something that would never have happened. My wife's she's a carpenter. She's turned the garage into like a woodwork studio. And, we've essentially also got that pattern that you're describing. And the other thing I would say as well is, like, that air of unreality that you basically talked about, where, you go online and it's this ridiculously febrile and, like, stressful atmosphere out there in the world. But then my actual day-to-day life is quite similar to what you're describing. The routine's been quite nice. Like, nothing much has really changed for us. But then really,
you kind of don't you feel a little bit like, then I feel a little bit guilty. Like, here I am walking up and down my gorgeous street, and again, it's not touching me. It's not survivor's guilt exactly, but it does feel strange that it feels so far removed. Although yesterday was the first thing that happened where it seemed to take a step closer, which was my son's best friend's older sister. Their whole family went and got tested because they were out of state for a week or so, and 3 family members tested negative, and then the sister tested not positive, but it was what did they call it? It was a non-something. I don't know what they call it.
There's lots of different categories, aren't there? There's like
right. So like,
there's asymptomatic, and then there's another one where, like, it's like a false positive, maybe, I think is.
So that's what it was. It was some kind of, anyway. So the father, my son's friend's father, Jay, who I'm friends with, Jay called up and said, "Hey, Matt, just want to let you know we went and tested, and Kate tested. I guess I'll just call it non-negative, I think is what he said. So
yeah.
It doesn't mean anything quite yet, but it was like, God, if she does come back positive, then we have to start thinking about. So it was like the first time where it felt closer,
Yeah, for sure. No, I've definitely I've had a good friend of mine's mum died of COVID, and it's definitely, I think in the UK, because we're so, the population density is so high. There's definitely I think everybody does know somebody that's been affected by it. And another interesting thing we've got over here is, because how class obsessed we are over here, and the new marker of class, which I read the other day, is whether you can work from home or not.
Absolutely.
That is basically the new working and middle class. Like, if you can work from home, you're middle class. If you can't, and you've actually got to get out there and put yourself in the firing line, then you're a lower class, which is that speaks to that thing we're talking about, doesn't it? For me and you, kind of make a bit of a weird living anyway with what we do. We have been privileged enough to kind of just blissfully continue to bimble around a little bit, really.
Right. Well, that's where it all fades. That's where it all fades into, what's happening with sort of, with civil rights right now. I mean, it all sort of, all these problems seem to kind of sort of merge at some point, and I don't know. We're going to get too far off the track here, but it's
there's no track. Far
yeah.
away.
Well, no. The track is just that I don't want to be the surfer who's pontificating about politics too much. I'll just say that, I sit here again. I've got all these hours in the day to fill, and I can work on the site a lot. I've got a huge stamina for that, and I've got a lot of time for my wife and kid, but that still leaves a lot of hours to obsessively scroll through the New York Times and CNN and everything else, and just feel like we're living in a period unlike anything in my lifetime, and maybe anything ever. And it's got me just on high. I feel like I'm on high alert at all times of the day, except for when I'm just sort of out walking and trying to not think about it, or when I'm working on the website. Otherwise, my brain just sort of, I'm always sort of half on fire. So anyway, I can totally
understand that, because from the outside, it looks like almost a perfect storm of ingredients over there. I mean, we've all got it. This situation has definitely shone a very harsh light on anything that's wrong with your society. Let's put it that way. Yeah. Or anything that needs looking at, but over there, it looks like it really is the perfect combination of things to really, every systemic issue that's been kind of buried is now coming to the fore. Well,
that is the silver lining, I think, and that in one of the things that feels really super interesting about this moment right now is that there's this kind of collective breath holding in a way until November when we vote, because November, I think, is going to sort of make or break things in a pretty big way, and so as much as there's a lot of despair and anger and fear in this country, and I think around the world, but especially in America right now, there's a feeling too that there's huge possibility to address a lot of things that haven't been addressed forever. Starting with, and November does not by any means solve things, but November is the point where you hopefully begin to turn it around and start and go into a new direction. So, and I do think that sense of we're on the verge of something really, really, a really big change is you can really feel that. And I'm terrible at telling making predictions, but I do think that November could be the beginning of something really important.
You feel like there's a reckoning on the way, essentially.
I do. But I've been wrong so many times on things like this that I don't know how far to sort of extend myself with how confident I feel. And again, 4 months in this time that we're living in is a long, long time. So And then, to bring this back to sort of surf is like, again, I just get sputtery and freaked out about it all. And then what I usually do when I start feeling about the way I am right now is I go into the back end of EOS and I pick up what I'm working on. So, today I'm working on Mark Cunningham's EOS page, the North Shore body surfer, whose EOS page has been criminally absent ever since the site's been up. He was in the book, but so then I'm going to do 2 or 3 different things on Mark Cunningham this week, and I put all this, I put all my focus into doing those pages, and that's my not my sedative exactly, but that's what calms me down. It takes my focus and puts it on something, sort of productive and worthy. And I love Mark Cunningham, and I saw him at a trade show last year, and he gave me a box of macadamia nuts and said, "I love your website." And I said, "Thanks, Mark." And it was a really funny story. I was in Florida, in Orlando, maybe it was 2 years ago. And I've sort of known Mark on and off for a long time, not well, but enough to say hello. And he also was at this trade show. He was flogging swim fins or something. And I think he's newly married, and I think he might even have a young kid. I could be wrong about that. But, he and I bonded a little bit over getting married late in life, and he was, I don't know if you've ever met him. He's just the friendliest, nicest guy, and he goes, "Oh, I've been meaning to send you a donation," and he kind of looks around in a little bit of a panic, and he reaches into his backpack and he pulls out this funky old Velcro wallet, like we used to have when I was in high school. Like you hear him, he goes, "Rip!"
Yeah,
he opens up his Velcro wallet and he digs around and he gives me his only bill. He had a 20. He goes, "Here, just take this," and I'm so stoked. And I go, "Oh man, that's okay." And he goes, "No, don't take it." And he goes, "That's not enough." And he looks around some more, and then he reaches into his backpack and he rummages around and brings out a box of macadamia nuts. The classic, last minute gift when you're at the Honolulu airport. And he goes, "Take this too." So I just said, "Thanks, Mark. That's fantastic." And I walked away with a $20 bill and a box of macadamia nuts.
What a legend.
I was super stoked. So I don't mean to say that he bought me off. Like he didn't pay for his EOS page. It was way overdue. But
payback's coming.
A year later, I'm finally getting around to posting his page. It's funny, when I did the book version of EOS, I never had to think much about images because I don't know if you've ever seen the book. It's a big giant.
Yeah. No, I know the book well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's just endless column and column after column after column of text, and every now and then, like every 4th page, there's a little crummy little like 3x3 black and white picture. So, when I did the website, a really, the whole point almost was to put all of the visuals to what I was. I'd done most of the writing part of it, but I'd failed. Because of the medium, I couldn't do anything with the visuals. So it's like the last, whatever it's been now, 10 years working on the website, largely has just been catching up on pictures and video that go with the words. But it's really hard. It's hard to put up a page unless I've got enough photos. And Mark, what I really wanted was there was a video that came out. I can't think of the name of it, like a little mini documentary on Mark Cunningham. I think it was in maybe 89, and he's got a VHS copy of it, and he keeps promising to send it to me, and he keeps saying he keeps apologizing for forgetting, but I really want to post this video thing. Anything from the 80s is usually I think it's 20 something minutes long, but they're usually really fun to watch, and I don't have it, and I couldn't not post his page without having it. I mean, I couldn't wait any longer to get it, so I went with the photos I have, but it's a little bit difficult with Mark because, and this is a little bit snobby for me, but like body surfing pictures to me, like, if I have 6 pictures of Mark body surfing, they all kind of look a little bit the same. I'm sorry to all the body surfers out there, but I found some really funny candid shots of him, and the object is to get 6 images for any EOS page. I want 6 shots, and I just finished yesterday, and actually Mark's EOS page just went up yesterday, so anyone listening can go out and have a look at that. But yeah, he's a great guy, and that's, I haven't been surfing for months. I live in Seattle, and I kind of made this vow a couple of years ago to quit surfing cold water, and we'll come back to this topic in a second. But what my experience with surfing these days, by and large is just losing myself in the sight.
Why did you make that decision? Because like that decision was so notorious to the point that when you did go surfing, Beach Grit ran a story, didn't they?
Yeah.
But what was that about? Like, why did you make that call?
It's let's see, how do I start to answer it? When I was 8 years old and started surfing, it was all I wanted to do, like all of us, right? And then let's just jump ahead 40 years, and that's still all I wanted to do, you know?
Yeah.
And I, by various means, honorable and not honorable, and to the, to the good part of my life and also sort of to the detriment of my life, I was able to surf more or less whenever I wanted from age 8 till 49.
I mean, right? which is a great run. I mean, let's be honest.
Huge, right? And I did so much. I was a B grade pro surfer. I worked at Surfer Magazine, and I wrote books, and I traveled. I got paid to travel and do crappy travel stories, which I hated. I was so bad at those.
I'm only laughing because I've got a chapter of that in my past as well. That's the only reason I'm laughing at that. So I definitely
the travel gig was just felt so dirty. I would just you want to go to do you want to go to Chile and South America? Yeah, I'd love to. And like, oh, you got to write an article. Okay, I'd love to. And then I had nothing to write. We were paid to go surf waves and be shuttled around by people who wanted to let us have a great time. And there was literally nothing to say. It wasn't like they did it in the 60s and 70s where you got in your VW bug and had an adventure. We were just flown down and shown
the face,
everything.
Aren't you? Yeah,
exactly. And then I had to write it. Yeah. So those, of all the things I've written, those are the ones I wish I could banish from the record. Anyway, finally at 49, I became a father. I got married at 45 and became a dad at 49, and that kind of was. I won't say that was the beginning of the end of me being full time, because for a few years before that, I was already feeling like I was sort of repeating myself a little bit. But anyway, having my son just sort of put the brakes on it a bit, made me question, do I really want to be doing this to the degree that I am? And then when my wife got the offer to move up here to Seattle, when she got the job offer at Amazon, and they just dropped a truckload of money on her. That's not actually true. Not in these days anyway, but it was enough money that she couldn't say no. And
yeah, sure.
I really dug my heels in. I can't do this, just out of sheer sort of stubbornness and being a full-time surfer. That's who I am. And
yeah, it's my identity.
Right. And I think that's it. I was really kind of scared to let that go. And I had a long talk with my dad about it after I told Jody no, and we'd gotten the first real fight we'd ever been in up to that point, where like old school sitcom stuff where I'm going to go sleep on the couch and she's in the other room, just won't talk to me. And I had a long talk with my dad the next day, and he's always been my sort of main advice giver, and I think I was ready to hear what he said, but in other words, he didn't necessarily convince me. There was part of me I think was ready to say, but he said, look, I think you should go up there and give it a try. You can come back if you want to. So anyway, we moved to Seattle, and that was it. Like the Amazon does this thing where they say, we want you to come work for us. We need you here in 3 weeks. So it happens really, really fast. And so 3 weeks later, I was not an ex-surfer exactly, but that time of my life where I had the choice of being able to surf every day was over. And what a surprise. It was actually really easy. I was relieved, So
that's the word I was going to ask you. Sorry to jump in there, but that's so interesting because you talk about it as like a self-identity thing, and it sounds like it's like there's got to be some control in there as well, right? Like this sort of like the way that you see yourself, your self-perception, your self-image. So I guess that was the question I was going to ask. Like, how did it feel? And you used the word relief. That's really interesting. Right. Was it almost because you felt liberated not to play that role anymore after so long?
that's part of it for sure. And I mean, a really big part of it was that I was, when we moved here, I was 51 or 50, I think. And, you know, because I'd never taken a break all that time, and because my body, I'm fit, or I was fit, I would, you know, I didn't really experience any kind of notice. Like I just sort of, for a long time, like in my 30s and most of my 40s, I was actually still sort of getting a little bit better, I think. Parts of my surfing anyway. But 2 or 3 years before that, I could see that it was starting to sort of tail off a bit. And it was so frustrating for me to see
sobering
that.
realization, isn't it, that one?
Right. And it also made me, it really bothered me to realize how, in a way, dependent my surfing experience had always been on how well I was surfing. I was never quite able. I enjoyed everything that we're supposed to enjoy about surfing. All of the, you know, the aesthetic, the companionship, all that, but it always came after I had been able to prove to myself, as I had to, like, daily, that I was still good at it. So everything, all the nicer parts of surfing were available to me only if I was surfing well. And that seems, you know, you shouldn't, at 51, like, that's stupid, right? I mean, why would you? And yet it's 60, so when I still surf now, I can't shake that. When I surf now on, you know, crappy borrowed boards in somebody else's wetsuit, I'm still trying to surf well, and it's just dumb. And I'm still struggling to try to, you know, how do I get over that? And how, anyway,
well, I think it's the theme. It's the theme of aging, that, though, isn't it? Because it's like I think whatever, you know, whether it's a physical, I mean, and its first manifestation is in your physical ability, isn't it? You know, like this,
right.
where you just can't do what you used to be able to do. You know, to put it that simply. I mean, I have it with snowboarding, which is something that I've done my whole life.
How old are you, Matt?
I'm 44. And every time I go, I get worse. You know, like, so, and I totally empathize what you're saying, because sometimes I find myself not enjoying it for that exact reason that you just described. And you're aware that it's ludicrous. You know, it's an ego thing, obviously, going on. And it's silly because it's still fundamentally a really enjoyable thing to do. But for whatever reason, you can't bring yourself to get the same thing out of it that you used to do. And especially when you're talking about these activities where, you know, the whole point is supposed to be that it's not about ego, it's, you know, your own progression, all that stuff, which, you know, is true to a point. But I just think for me personally, it's been you know, ultimately what's happening is I'm getting older and I don't really like it. And like, so it's, you know, I'm struggling to kind of square it, really, you know. And so the last few years since we've moved up here, apart from a few, so a couple of years ago, I had this sort of moment. I moved up here with, I don't know, 6 boards or something or whatever, and the nearest wave is sort of 3 hours away. So at first I was thinking, well, I'll just go down there still. It's not, you know, I can still do a day trip out of that. And I had a couple of friends up here who really guided me, who gave me a really nice soft landing. I want to say shout out to Jeremy Sterling, because a friend of mine, he's this guy that I knew, and he has a second home, like a little cabin out there at the nearest break, and it's this funky little A-frame thing, the surf shack, and you know, one morning, not long after I landed here, or flew in and moved here, Jeremy said, "Hey, we're going to go surfing. I'm going to introduce you around." He picks me up in his big truck, and we drive down there into this thing, and it was just all so easy and set up for me. And I go, "Oh, this is great. I'm going to be able to sort of do this." And it's a tough, that wave I'm talking about, sort of a tough beach break. And I did it. I went out there for a couple of years with Jeremy now and then, and I realized after 20 years of surfing in San Francisco, which was a similar wave to the wave I've been surfing up here. I'd started surfing up here. Really, really cold water beach break surf where it's pretty big, where you're, some huge portion of your session is just duck diving, one after the other, cold water. I just thought, God, I'm too old to be doing this. And I did it for 3 or 4 years.
And then at some point, I'd actually put all my boards down at Jeremy's house, and at some point I just said, just, keep them. Whoever wants to ride them can use them. And then I kind of ceremoniously, like 3 years ago, took this hooded 5.4 that I'd been using all these years, and it was getting kind of funky. So it wasn't like I was throwing away my LP collection. That's another thing I'd done a long time ago that I regret. I just took my wetsuit out and I put it in the trash, and I said, I'm done surfing in cold water. Like I'm just too old to be doing that. And I said, well, my surf life from now on is going to be twice a year in either, in Mexico or Costa Rica or somewhere warm. Warm, that's where old people should surf, is in warm spots. And then what happened, it was about a year ago, Jody said, well, what do you want to do for your 60th birthday? I turned 60 in May. And I said, well, what I want to do is go down to Costa Rica and just go surfing for a few days and see how I do. And so that was the plan, and then the virus hit and everything sort of shut down. And I'm thinking, God, there's not going to be a vaccine here for probably 2 years. And I'm not going to not surf. Because despite everything I've just said about how I feel about it and how frustrating surfing is, it's really important to me still to be able to tell myself and others that I can still actually do it. Again, back to the whole sort of ego thing. But
yeah, exactly.
So when I went to Costa Rica last year, 2 or 3 days of just being a total kook. But at some point, I got a wave, and I was on, my feet were underneath me correctly, and I surfed this wave. Not well, but I surfed it to a way that I felt appropriate to, where I've been. And at one point at the end, I was going fast, and I pulled off the back, and all of the good feeling, everything that I love about surfing, sort of came back to me in those moments. Like, I remember literally looking up and sort of at the horizon and the people out there, and knowing that there's more waves coming, and everything came back to me about how much I love to ride waves, right? So in that moment, I thought, well, it's actually worth me going out and struggling, being frustrated with the whole experience. If I can just pick off a few of those in a 1 week trip, all I need. And it's not me getting spit out of a big tube. It's not me doing anything. It's just feeling a bit of a rhythm and a bit of glide, and feeling like I did it well. I did it adequately.
Yeah, well, it's that relation, isn't it, between the old feeling that you had and seeing that glimmer of it again, isn't it?
It just sort of was my. It was just like a connection back to how I felt for all those years before, and I go, I'll take it. That was wonderful. That's great. So that's what I was looking forward to doing this last May for my birthday, and then again, virus hit, and my response was interesting. Like I got kind of pissed off that the virus had taken away. I just wanted to do this one stupid, indulgent thing. I wanted to fly to Costa Rica and flog myself for 3 days until I got that wave again, and then more or less, and then fly home. And I couldn't do it, and I was being told that I couldn't do it, and my response was to buy a new wetsuit. So I'm in my closet here right now. I've got a brand new hooded 5.3 smelling up this whole room I'm sitting in with that new wetsuit smell. And I'm going to go back down with Jeremy, and next time it's shoulder high and nice. And clean, and start surfing again, and try to again work on this problem we're talking about of not caring too much about it. So I kind of want to have I want a little reset here for myself as a cold water surfer. Just almost out of spite, like, fuck, you can't tell me I can't surf, right? I'm still gonna. I'm not like those. I'm not like the guys in Orange County who are like, it's not an infringement on my liberty. I'm just saying, like, I still want to get in the water. Yeah. Anyway,
it's strong enough. It's strong enough that it's well, and also, like you say, that word spite is interesting as well, isn't it? Because it's you've clearly got unfinished business. Like, I mean, I remember I was in the Maldives about 4 years ago, and there was a guy. It's really interesting. He was 70, and he was maybe a bit older, actually, maybe about 75. And he was like, he was surfing, like, obviously, getting towards the end of his life. And I had a similar conversation with him where he said he'd been exactly through what you're talking about. He said he'd given up, for a good few years, where he'd been so frustrated because he just couldn't get to that level that he'd been at. And he described it as like a real necessary part of it, and his answer in the end was like, you know what? I'm going to surf bigger boards in warm water, and that'll
exactly.
do.
Well, it's still, even the compromised lesser version of surfing is, for me anyway, better than, like, I've started skiing a little bit because my son skis, and we went skiing a few times this year, and like, that was another thing that happened actually that made me want to surf. Was I went skiing and I thought, God, I remember I used to be so much more defensive about how great surfing is when I was younger, because it's the thing I did, and I wanted everyone to think how great it was and to prove that I hadn't sort of wasted my life doing it and everything. And I've kind of given that up by and large. But when I went skiing with Teddy, as fun as it was, part of me was just going, God, I was right all those years. Surfing is, it's. I'd rather be a really shit surfer and just get a couple waves and have to spend whatever thousands of dollars to go somewhere warm where I don't have to wear a wetsuit to do it, and just then to drive 40 minutes away from my house whenever I want to do this, which was to ski, which is fun, but it's not in the, I still really have this, it turns out, this deep down, feeling for surfing, that, and it's this deep down belief that it is a singular, an amazing and just incredible thing to do, incredible waste of time, the best waste of time.
Well, tell me about the Encyclopaedia, because you mentioned the book and you mentioned the website, and clearly what you've got on your hands there is like an endless life's work.
Right.
When I look at your output, and I'm pretty familiar with your career and your writing, as I think most consumers of surf media are, and I think what strikes me is the vastness of the enterprise that you've taken on, and like the endlessness of it, which I, as a writer myself, and somebody who's also like really protective of and interested in the culture and the history, I almost envy in a way, because it's you can never finish it, you can never.
Right.
So how does, I guess I've got two questions on that. Like, how did it start, and where does it end? Those.
The start of it is I quit Surfer magazine at the end of 1990. I think I had the shortest ever tenure as editor, and I've been telling people I've been the editor at Surfer for, I guess that's 30 years now, right? What I never say is that I was editor, I think, for only 8 months. Because by the time they'd made me editor, I'd already made this decision that I wanted to go back to school. And I took the editor position mostly because I knew, even at 29, even though I wanted out, I knew that I wanted to be able to say that I was the editor of Surfer, right? It just seemed like that had been something I'd wanted since I was really little. And I thought so highly of Drew Campion, who was the editor at Surfer when I was a kid. And I just wanted to be able to say that I was the editor. And so I had this 8-month period where I was the editor, and I actually really enjoyed being the editor of Surfer, but I already had a foot out the door. So I went off to school for 2 years, and undergrad, because I'd never finished college. I'd dropped out. So I finished college, decided I was going to go into history. I got into a PhD program at UCLA in Los Angeles.
Right, okay.
Yeah, and that lasted, my days as a grad student lasted, I think, 3.5 weeks, and I just scurried. I did my those 2 years. When I left Surfer, I went up to San Francisco, actually Oakland, and I was at UC Berkeley. Got into UCLA, moved to LA, 3.5 weeks of school, and then I could not wait to get back up to San Francisco. So I ran back up to San Francisco. So I did I moved twice in 6 months. It was a joke, but I was really relieved and really convinced that I'd looked into that to academia enough to know that it wasn't for me. I would have been a terrible scholar, I think. And then so I'm up there at age I think 33, and I was just freelancing some stuff, and I did a couple of books, I think, at that point. And again, I'm having a conversation with my dad, as you know, I do on a weekly basis, and I'd said some kind of I'd begun collecting surfer magazines at that point, and I think this is before I started databasing everything. But I was just sort of beginning to get sort of obsessive about loading up my home office, and I made some half-joking remark about how I could beat anybody in surf trivia, or I knew more about surfing than anybody, or something. And he said, because I was sort of I'd been casting about for a project, he goes, "You should write an encyclopedia." And I went, "Ha ha ha," and he went, "Ha ha ha." And then, a few months later, I had a proposal for the Encyclopedia of Surfing, which went nowhere. And then I think 3 years later or something, I redid the proposal and sold it to Harcourt. So the book version of Encyclopedia was my dad's idea, but it fit me because it turns out that I have zero problem. In fact, I really like projects that sort of don't end, or projects that have really, really, really long periods of development. I mean, I think I spent 18 months, right when I got my signing check for Encyclopedia, doing nothing but databasing all my surf magazines, just paging through. And because, if I'm going to do a piece, if I'm going to do a thing on Jeff Crawford from Florida, I don't want to have to be paging through magazines going, I think there was a piece in Surfing Magazine in 1973. I need to know. It's like, it's like going into the library. You don't just need the books. You have to go to the card system, whatever they have.
Can I just ask a very quick question?
Yeah.
Then? So,
yeah.
like, what did that look like? Did you? I'm a geek on this stuff. Did you literally created your own sort of database system and way of cross-referencing?
I did. Yeah. Why am I spacing on the name of the program I use? It's the really famous one, FileMaker Pro. I bought whatever current version of FileMaker Pro was out in. This would have been in, I think, 99. And, if you created, databases are really easy to create, and you just create these different, it's too boring. It's too boring to even talk about. But
it's a habit though, isn't it? Like ultimately, once you fill that info in and
once you start doing it, so like once I go, okay, I'm gonna just database all my surfers. I had a whole collection of surfers, and like once you start doing it, and you see that at a few keystrokes you can get. And so let me make this clear. I wasn't scanning pages. You're paging through a magazine. Yeah, and
it's the references.
And so once you can get all of the material that it's in your room, like I can get all 6 articles on Mickey Mignot's after a 4-second search. It's really hard to describe to people that aren't. Again, like, the geek in me salutes the geek in you on this, but when you can do that, you can't imagine not being. It's like a geek superpower, right? So,
well, it really shows in the work, the depth, and this is the reason I asked the question, because the depth of what you do is so evident. And,
but it's funny because the
weight of it is really evident.
Yeah, people mistakenly think that I have depth, and I don't. I just have a deep database, So it's like when you can do that, you can appear to be sort of have depths that you might not have. So I just happen to be the person that is able to sit and do that for months or years at a time. And I'm still, the database project itself is never finished. I'm still building that out. Anyway, so once the database was done, the encyclopedia itself was like I think I worked backwards from, I think it was 750,000 words, and I cut that up into sizes, and then I filled it. It was like I reverse engineered it from, I think, 750,000 words down to 1,200 entries, and I had to figure out how long each entry was going to be to get to 750,000 words. And again, that's all sort of done with databasing and some really rudimentary, not statistics exactly, but just figuring out. adding up numbers to get to that big number. And then it was just like writing. I wrote 1,200 short little articles, right, from 50 words to 1,000 words. 50 words for the wetsuit booties or something, and 1,000 words for Tom Curran, and that was the book. And the minute the book was done, it was already becoming dated, So I went ahead and did History of Surfing just to get that out of my system, and right about when Jody was pregnant with Teddy, when I was finishing up history. It was becoming easier. I can't remember I can't remember what platform it was, but it was just becoming easier to create websites in which you could really load up lots of sort of high-res photos and videos. So it became obvious that I should make it into a website. And then, the thing there was no one's giving me an advance to do it. So the whole struggle to make it pay for itself is ongoing. But that's so to get back to what you said earlier, it's huge. And the thing is, it's not just all the material that I've got, but at this point, however many years I'm into the sort of EOS, the amount of time that EOS has been out there and people know it and mostly like it. Everybody knows that I'm doing this sort of non-profit. I made this little non-profit business out of it, and that I take a tiny little salary to do it, and that's shitty for my income. But it's been great that almost everybody has allowed me to use their stuff because they like the site and they like the book. So I have this ace in the hole doesn't even begin to describe the advantage that I have in being able to use Art Brewer's photos and John Severson's film and Kai Neville's film, and everybody. I get to use almost everything I have, and nobody, so it's amazing. And so on one hand, it's like it's a huge amount of stuff that I've put out there. But if you pull back and look at what the mission sort of is, it's a fraction of what ought to be on there, and it's still just me. And I have a guy in Bristol, Mark Auger, who's my dev guy and just basically my partner on this project, and another guy in Southern California named Brad Barrett, who helps me just sort of load pages. But it's still just a tiny little operation. And again, the advantage is that I can sort of use almost whatever I want. The disadvantage is it's a bottleneck. I can't get enough stuff up there fast enough, and it's okay. I don't lose too much sleep over it. I've got 2,000 subscribers. I'd like to have quadruple that, but the people that like it really like it. And the thing that I started doing about 2 years ago that's been especially fun is the Sunday Joint. And so a big part of my work week, not a big part, but almost all of Monday is just me interacting with people who respond to the Sunday Joint. So it's my work satisfaction is just through the roof. I've never been happier with the work, even though it's a little bit overwhelming to realize that it'll never even be 2% finished. It's always going to be incredibly incomplete.
Yeah. Well, that's what's so fascinating about it. And I think that's what confers it a bit of a moral authority as well, which is presumably why people are, buying into it so heavily, whether it's the subscribers or the contributors that then use film and video. I guess the question I've got about it is, surf history is so contentious is probably the wrong word, but like there's a lot of opinions about it. And obviously when you set yourself up to be the steward of that, as you effectively have, there's a real fine line, isn't there, between honouring that history but also editorializing.
Right.
So
right.
So like how difficult is that tightrope to walk? Because I'm getting at in surfing culture that is a thing, isn't it? There's a history, and there's the people are protective of that. So, but as you said, there's so many untold stories, and there's so much to this. So has that been difficult to kind of balance that?
It's hugely difficult, and my cop out that I sort of this card that I play all the time, if it gets sometimes, if it, or not all the time, but is I will say, I'll put that on the. Somebody will say something like, "Why isn't so and so on the site?" And I'll say, "That's someone that should be on they should be on there." I'll put it on the to-do list, and I'll follow that by saying it's a really long list. So it's like,
I mean, that's
again,
a valid answer.
it's a terrible answer, but I can't. It's also that I can't. Let me think about this. It gets. I'd have to think of something specific. Like we'd have to touch on something sort of specific for me to say, why I did or didn't sort of respond to that. I think that because I'm having to still fill in pretty big fundamental parts of surf history and not so much off on the fringes, but I want to get back to the fringe part of it in a second, because I'm not really trying to do a radically sort of revised history of surfing. It's still the same, you'll pick a number of thousand people and a few hundred events that sort of define this thing.
Yeah.
And then now and then we'll sort of revisit something and think about I've kind of pegged down Tom Blake a little bit, for example, who's who's a foundational figure in surf, and the more I've looked into what Blake did and his contributions, it's not that they weren't massive, but there were things that he did, like with the hollow surfboard, for example, that were a dead end, like the hollow surfboard that was anyway. So I'll now and then I'll come in and sort of say, hold up, maybe we can rethink this a little bit. But I'm not out to, by and large, sort of rewrite this in any way. I also don't put anybody too high on a pedestal. Or usually when I put someone on a pedestal, so there's two voices I have on the whole site. There's the kind of historical third person thing where that's the voice I've got for EOS and for history of surfing, and then the blog posts and some of the interview pieces, and that it's more my own voice. And I will put people on my own sort of personal pedestals, like I've always had a thing for Barry Kanaiapuni of Hawaii, for example. But I'm not gonna sort of make heroes out of sort of anybody. I'm sort of beyond that. So I don't. I think that I can do history in a way that's sort of more true. I want to present people for and the sport sort of for who it is, better and worse.
Yeah.
And I'm not. In other words, I'm not trying to. I'm not trying to defend surfing anymore or promote surfing anymore. Sure. It's more interesting to me just to sort of say this is sort of my take, at least, on what this whole thing has meant and why it's interesting and why it's laughable, and these are the people that have experienced it, and see what you think.
Do you? How often do you discover new stories that just haven't been given anywhere near the amount of attention that you feel they should have done? Because obviously, that kind of unseen narrative thing is a real topic right now. Just generally in society, this conversation is
right.
That there's a chosen narrative that we all choose and that we all adhere to, and surfing definitely has that. Surfing definitely has this uber overarching narrative. So I guess with the amount of research you're doing and the amount of digging you're doing, you must be finding some of these unseen stories that just have never been given the due.
I think it's more like you'll come across a moment or a surfer or something that wasn't forgotten but maybe underemphasized. And the one that comes to mind is in the early days of the short surfboards, where all the attention forever went to Bob McTavish and Greeno and Nat Young, and that's not wrong. But there was this whole thing that was sort of happened at that same moment where Midget Farrelly, who was sort of the generation prior, was sort of his contribution to short surfboards got really depressed for a while, and so it turns out that Midget was doing much the same thing that Bob McTavish was. And in fact, they used to go out surfing. They didn't like each other in '67, I don't think. But they were making boards, and wherever they were making boards, and test riding them at the same beach 100 yards down from each other. And Bob McTavish is working on these V-bottoms and looking up the beach and seeing Midget on some kind of board that Bob couldn't quite make out what the board was, I suppose. But they're both making their boards smaller, and they're both doing all these refinements, and neither one quite knows what the other's doing. And it turns out that Midget's boards were probably better. And Bob, I think, because he was surfing with Nat Young and because he was just in with the right people, and Midget made this point endlessly later in his life, Midget had the surf media behind him. He had the Witzig brothers, and he had Drew Campion, and he had all of the cool tastemakers just loved McTavish, Nat Young, and Greeno, and so that became the narrative that we've sort of told ourselves. And then Brewer comes into it too, but I don't want to get sidetracked on that. But it looks like Midget Farrelly was making better boards and probably surfing them better in this period that we never give him credit for. Midget's kind of thought of as the guy that won the 64 world titles, and you think of Midget as this longboard surfer, and he might have done his best surfing, and I think without question was doing his best board making in this period, 67, 68, 69, that we associate with a different group of people. So it's almost like I don't often find undiscovered sort of bits of surf history or themes. You just find things that have been underplayed or overplayed.
Yeah, you can look at it from a different angle and understand perhaps how decisions or coverage or whatever it was led to the narrative that we have now, as it were. Yeah,
right. And it becomes really interesting in that Midget was a dour, kind of quiet, sort of cynical person in a lot of ways. And McTavish was just the opposite. Really outgoing, really fun, really talkative. And it's like, so, surf history ended up being sort of filtered through, or it comes to us because of who was speaking it at a certain time. And Midget was really flawed in a lot of ways, but he wasn't wrong to say that the way that whole period ended up being presented was a bit bent,
Yeah.
And I don't think he didn't necessarily say it should have been me, but he said that those guys, and if you've ever met or talked with Nat Young, especially, who was for a while there was Bob McTavish's. That one year in particular, '67, when they took the V bottoms to Hawaii, they were kind of a team, and Nat Young really kind of owns that period, that late '60s period, and he's overwhelming. If you're in his presence, it's intimidating, and it's kind of you're in this glow. If he's in a good mood, you're with somebody who is, literally larger than life, and he was every bit as important and as great a surfer as we've all given him credit for, but his presence was so overpowering that you can see where it would literally kind of bend history in his direction, right? So
yeah, it's that whole like history is written by the victors kind of line, isn't it? Which is
right.
just true for any field, isn't it? I guess that's why I asked the question, really, because at this point now, you've got such a platform and responsibility to be able to correct that, if correct it is the right word, but almost a better analogy is just shine a light in a different direction, isn't it?
Right.
To sort of, like as you put it, just show things that have perhaps been left behind a little bit, which is the real depth to it, isn't it? Which is why it's so fascinating.
Well, it's also really that's sort of part of the fun. When I left Surfer and I went to Berkeley, I majored in history, so I wasn't a scholar, but I learned enough in those 2 years to know that by and large it's almost always worthwhile to go back and test to see if the version of events that we've chosen to accept is, sort of holds up. And again, I don't want to stay there, but our own country right now with what's happening with renaming things that were associated with the Confederacy, the Civil War, or all these statues that are being yanked down. We are right now doing a revision. We're in the process of doing a revision on our own history of this country. So, and in a micro version, we can do the same with surf.
Yeah. Well, that conversation just speaks to the power of it, doesn't it? The importance of it. And that's why it's so fascinating right now. This general atmosphere, and why it is filtering down to things like surfing.
But to say, well, but to bring it back to Encyclopaedia of Surfing, I'm not actually spending much time with my historian hat on, because I'm prancing around writing a Sunday joint that is just me, channeling Charlie Smith, or I'm making a video and where I'm just spending 3 days just trying to pull together 6 minutes of Tom Curran set to a Robin Trower song. It's like it, and that's part of it. That's frustrating, because I would love to spend more time doing what we're talking about with the history, but also I've got to make a video clip, and I have to put up an interview, and I have to do the Sunday joint, and then all day Monday I'm just zinging emails back and forth with people because I like doing it, but I'm also running a small business, so it's an interesting career, and I suppose it's kind of pretty particular to this age that we're in, where you have to be sort of a small one-man, one-woman operation onto yourself to make this work. But I find it fascinating to have to just shift to go to all these different places in the course of a week. I love doing it, but I also miss, like when I did History of Surfing, I think I spent, I think that was 4 years where all I was doing was thinking about surf history. And I remember finishing that book, and you've probably seen the cover. It's those two guys laying on the beach looking out at an empty wave. The History of Surfing cover had just come together about the time that I finished the second draft, I think. And the cover was so good. And I was so happy to have just run through my version of the sport, from 2,000 years ago to the year 2000, I think it was, or something. And I was glad to have it done. I go, that's it. I don't want to sort of do that anymore. I don't want to have to spend that much time trying to make this all fit and sort of figure it out as best I could, knowing that again, the minute that book published, new things are coming up and there's new angles to take on stuff. And I've done a little bit of that. I did a little bit of that when I posted all the history chapters on the website. I went through and kind of fixed and altered and added to the chapters that I'd written. But I don't feel at all like when I see myself referred to as a surfing historian, I always cringe a little, because again, if you're doing a thing like the Sunday Joint, or if you're making a video, surf history feels like way back there on the resume most of the days.
Yeah, but when you're doing something like you're doing, though, which obviously you've got to enjoy it, haven't you? You've got to just you've set this up yourself. You're funding it yourself. You're doing it all yourself. I'm a big believer in the fact that you're allowed to just flip between things that interest you and call it a job.
Well, it's this weird period, right? I mean, what I'm doing wouldn't have, there still kind of isn't a real job description for it, but to be a one-man, more or less, show, doing all these things I've just talked about, when it's video and it's photo editing and it's running the business and it's being an historian and an archivist and all that, it's yeah, it's weird. It seems like I almost don't know how to describe it, except it's website owner, which means you just sort of do all of it. And I do love all of it, but it also gets, some days you just feel a bit overwhelmed. And again, maybe that's my age. Like I said, I just turned 60, but mostly again because I can always plead. I can always plead that the job will never be done, and I'm a little bit overwhelmed. I just choose to do whatever I feel like doing that day, because it doesn't matter. No one's gonna notice if I don't fix if I don't go back in and fix the Mick Fanning piece on EOS, because it's 5 years out of date. It doesn't. I just shrug my shoulders and say, well, I was too busy doing the join, or I was too busy making the video. So anyway, as I say, I love it. It does feel like a lot of times like it's just an endless broken field run. I'm zigging left and running backwards and doing flips and all that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you must have been tempted over the years to think of expanding it, or has that never been a consideration?
Well, I've expanded it a lot of times. It was when it went up, I think it went up in 2013 when I first pushed it from dev to live. It was just the Encyclopaedia.
But I mean as an operation though, with like getting staff and
no, I think about that all the time, and it's just like I can't. I'd have to pay. So I pay myself $25,000 a year to do this, and I pay my partner Mark gets $25,000 a year to do this, and then my part-time guy Brad gets $500 a month. He's and that's it. And like, to pay anybody a real salary, like if I wanted to bring somebody in to do somebody ought to be doing. I don't have any sort of marketing program. I don't have anybody, like, it's a nonprofit. There ought to be somebody just in charge of fundraising, right? But I'd have to pay somebody enough money to pay their own salary, and then put some extra. I can never make the numbers add up to where I could pay someone in order to have them make enough money to basically pay themselves and put a little bit more into our bottom line. I can't imagine staffing up. And I've had some volunteers do work. And I find that for the most part that doesn't work. People get stoked up. People are pretty regularly say, I'd love to help. What can I do? And there's a bit of a curve just to bring them up to speed to be able to do any kind of data entry. And then, if people aren't getting paid, eventually when something else comes up that they want to do, I'm always really appreciative, but usually it sort of all tails off. And unless you're paying them, you can't say anything about it, right? I mean,
it's the classic intern dilemma, isn't it? I've actually got a brilliant intern for this right now, but I've actually had the last two have been great. But yeah, it almost becomes another thing you need to worry about, doesn't it?
Right.
And like I just think it becomes something else, doesn't it? And I guess that's what I'm getting at. You've created this thing which appears to be the perfect like nexus of all your interests, and you get to make a living from it, get to explore all these different areas and ideas. That's great, isn't it? It doesn't have to become like this huge operation.
No, I never ever thought it was going to be a real moneymaker. I did think, and I still do think, that it could pay me double what it's paying me now. I could make $50,000 a year. I would like that. But I just, the first thought I had when I was sort of conceptually thinking, well, what does a website like this want to be? Is I knew it wasn't going to be there would be no ads on it. I really, and that was sort of just personal. I can't stand clicking off the banners or dealing with the ads. And the first way that I thought it would pay for itself is that I would just have a single presenting sponsor, which Surfer Magazine did for, I think, 3 years. And that was great. Surfer Magazine, this was before it was a subscription service. It was Surfer Magazine presents Encyclopedia Surfing, and they weren't allowed to put ads on the site. And part of that deal was they wanted me to do a little bit of writing for the magazine, which I did. But and I think EOS at that point had a lot of links over to Surfer, so it was a really great 3-year thing. And then the mag industry cratered, and that deal went away.
Yeah,
and so on and so forth. That leads me to the subscriber model, which I really think is the way to go. I love knowing who I'm working for at all times. In other words, I never wanted to go out and have to deal with keeping advertisers. Was never even in my thought that I could maintain a have advertisers.
Just becomes different, doesn't it?
It's like, see again, if it's that first of all, I didn't aesthetically I didn't want the site to have ads on it, but it's also like, again, that's a place where that's a different job, right? And I've already got enough sort of jobs here, and so was I going to hire a person whose sole responsibility was going to be ad director for EOS? That it seemed that wasn't out of the. That's how you'd have to do it. I wouldn't. Anyway, that was never actually that viable. So the subscription service thing was the way to go. I'm happy with that model. It's just sort of a slow building thing, and it's slow building in part because I'm not out there flogging it. I'm not doing any promotions for the site. I can barely do a post each week on Insta just to let people know that I'm still doing this, And so the 2,000 subscribers I have, I think that's by and large been a lot of word of mouth. People who like the site and who like the joint especially tell their friends, and I get a few new subscribers each week. And it is, having it be small also means that I can sort of stay in touch with people. It's stable right now. It feels good. If the subscriber base doubled soon, that would be fantastic. And I think that's going to happen.
Do you know that Kevin Kelly essay, 1,000 True Fans? He's the Wired. He said it Wired.
From a few years ago. How long ago was it?
I think that probably is about 15 years old, that essay. But I just really like that idea of you don't need to hit the jackpot. You don't need to get a record deal, get a publishing deal, get this big permission from the higher authority that's going to suddenly make all your dreams come true. Like it's actually fine just to develop a small community that can that you can give value to, and also they can enable you to do what you're good at and what you want to do. I mean, it's completely fine, and you don't need to do anything more than that. I think.
Yeah, and I think to that end exactly is that when I was unable to get a presenting sponsor after Surfer left, and I had this I had a fundraiser and I switched over to the subscription thing. It became really clear to me after the very first. I did a fundraiser called it was Save EOS. It was SOS EOS or something. I was going to say, because the site at that point was really close to closing. I'd had a little money in the bank that I'd gone through to support the site, and now all of a sudden it was really close to being unsustainable. So I think it was 2.5 years ago, saved my website, and people really rallied. And I kept thinking, God, somebody is going to, one of these big dick surf guys is going to think, God, Warshaw's doing a worthy thing here. I should just give him $100,000, and keep it going. And that didn't happen. I got a couple of anonymous people gave me $1,000, but I think I raised, I'm forgetting now. I think it was $60,000 or something. Anyway, it was by and large $25, $10, $50 people just throwing these, what they had, shaking out the change that they could spare, digging into the couch cushions and stuff. And there was a moment when that really successful fundraiser finished, that it was really clear to me that this is who I do. I don't want to look for a sponsor. I don't want to have a presenting sponsor. And you could say, well, of course you're saying that now. It's after you didn't get one, but it made it a lot simpler. It made it clear. It was really clear in my head that if the only entity that you have to sort of worry about are the subscribers. That actually makes it easier. Like I don't want to have to. The whole thing with Surfer when that was going on was sort of, there was this thing in the back of my head going, God, what happens if Surfer goes away? That money goes away. And I thought, oh, that'll never happen. It's Surfer magazine. It's and that was me just not seeing that. I wasn't really paying attention to what was happening in print at that point. And then surfing went tits up, and all of a sudden I was going, wow, could that possibly happen to Surfer? And then, next thing I knew, they were politely telling me that they weren't going to renew the contract, So I didn't ever want to have to be in a place where I was scrambling to try to fill the revenue stream. And, it turns out that with 2,000 subscribers, I can keep it going as is. And again, I'd so love to have 2,000 more, but it's actually okay right now. And who knows? We're talking about making EOS T-shirts and mugs, and maybe there'll be a little added revenue from flogging stuff on drop shipping a bright orange EOS mug to people for a contribution to a good cause. So we'll see. I don't know. There's a few ways that we can maybe bump the money up, but for the most part, I'm pretty stoked to have the support that I've got, and especially, like I say, every Monday when I get this flood of emails about the joint, it seems in a way that I never had when I was at Surfer Magazine or when I was writing books or freelancing articles. I've got a straight, direct connection to whoever wants to write into me after the joint or any other time that weekly reminds me who I'm doing this for.
Which is brilliant. And I mean, like you say, you can't, if it was bigger, you'd lose that, wouldn't you? And presumably that's one of the things that makes it what it is as a community.
Yeah. So anyway, no complaints.
In terms of the research, we're kind of talking about this almost like as a detective story in a lot of ways, like the digging, the history. I'm gonna ask you a pretty obvious one, but have you got a favorite kind of chapter or story that you've uncovered that really stands out in this what is essentially, like I said earlier, like a life's work?
No, I have favorite periods, and I have favorite surfers, and I have, I guess, favorite sort of ideas about what surfing kind of is. And this, I wasn't trying to sort of veer this into the sort of wave pool thing, but it seems like it's a weird bug. Wave pools are always kind of in my head a little bit. And when I think, I like when I'm able to kind of get a grasp on if there's a sort of a really foundational thing about what it means to be a surfer. And I suppose that always leads me back to that post World War II period on the beach at Malibu, when nobody's much paying attention and things are sort of getting back to normal, and a handful of surfers are working on the boards that really get us from to where we are now. In other words, before the war, it was mostly big, wide-tailed, heavy planks, mostly going straight, a little bit of angling. And then not long after the war, you've got a board that looks similar to the longboards that followed, with big fins, and they're starting to do hot angles, and you see people starting to turn. And there was just this period right after the war where let's go to Malibu, let's work on these hot rod boards we're doing in balsa with fiberglass. They didn't have fiberglass before the war. They weren't using them on boards. And I think also let's sort of figure out, let's do this because it's just really fun. Let's not be lifeguards anymore. Let's not associate with. Let's not be club. We don't have to have a club. It was just this period on the beach, close to LA, and I was born in LA, and I've got a sort of huge soft spot in my heart for what it meant to live in LA mid-century. And not just the fun of it, but also kind of the sacrifice that if you were going to surf a lot, you had to make these choices. Well, I'm not going to take that job that my parents want me to take, or I'm going to do this despite the fact that my teachers are telling me, what do you, why didn't you go out for the football team? And I just like that you had to sort of make a conscious decision to surf a lot, that there was no outside sort of influences telling you, putting stickers on things or telling you how to do it, or sort of, there was no filter really. So it was this culture that kind of invented itself right after World War II. And I also like that even then it was difficult. You still had to get yourself to the beach. You still had to figure out when and where to surf and who to sort of stay away from, and who to hang out with, and all this. And it just means a lot to me to think that that's sort of what the surfing experience was for me also in the decades that sort of followed. Like, you had to sort of commit to it. And that it wasn't actually all fun. It was something that you always had to sort of work really hard at. Like, if you started surfing at Malibu in 1947, it took 3 years. Like, I think Sam George said, you have to surf for 3 years just to get out of being a kook, and that kind of amount of effort that you have to put into it, I think is great. I don't think it's supposed to be easy. So anyway, I contrast that with this thought that I have about what surfing will be like in a wave pool era, where little kids who have been surfing just for a little while but happen to know the right people are getting 10-second tube rides at Surf Ranch because they were able to get to Surf Ranch and ride waves that were better and longer and hollower than anything I've surfed in 50 years. So it's like that to bring that precision, to bring that repetition and the mechanics of it, to bring all that science to bear, to bring all that machinery to bear. That's the age we're in or heading toward, and it really it gets in my head all the time. And I mostly because I feel that to do this thing that we love so much, I think, is to have to really work at it. And again, it's all this joy and all this fun and all this beauty comes, but you have to put a lot into it to sort of get that. And I do think that the wave pool fundamentally doesn't alter, it breaks that. It actually just smashes that whole sort of notion of what it means to be a surfer. So I don't know if that's a sky is falling kind of thing. Like, for all I know, maybe
it's so interesting. I mean, so you surfed the Surf Ranch, didn't you? And
I did.
And you wrote about it. And I mean, my take on your story was like, it's great, but I reject it, essentially. Like it is a brilliant experience, but for me, it isn't. It, as you've just described your vision of surfing, it isn't that. I guess the obvious thing to say about that, though, is, those days are gone. Like that isn't, this like romantic foundational myth of surfing. Obviously, it's a hugely appealing picture that you've just painted, and I think anybody can really hunger for that vision of surfing. But that isn't where we are now, and so I guess it is always going to change. So how far do you have to cling? At what point do you have to let that go?
I don't know. What made it romantic, what made the whole thing beneath all of the romance and the adventure was that wave, those moments that we all sort of were chasing after as surfers, were only available by putting in all the years and the work and all the effort. That was the only way you could get a wave that would be something that would stick with you forever, was to stalk it and to work at it. And so you can still say, well, I'm just going to keep doing that. I'm not going to surf the pools. But on the other hand, I'm not so sure that, teenage me would choose to. Why would I? God, the 3 best surf trips that I ever had all came one after the other in the early 2000s. And I'd been going on surf trips at that point for, I guess, 30 years or something, right? Yeah. And I had a few okay ones, but all of a sudden I had 3 in a row. Bam, 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 just incredible waves. One in El Salvador, one in Baja, and I went on a boat trip. And it's like that was sort of my much delayed payoff for all that time. It felt, that's the narrative I choose to put on it now. But like all those trips that were okay, some were really shitty. I mean, I went all the way to Australia when I was 21, and I didn't, for 2 weeks and didn't get a single good session. It was just, I got a lot of fun sessions, but nothing. I'd been waiting to go to Australia for years, and I went, and it was just sort of not that great. And eventually I did have these 3 amazing trips in a row, and then I get to Surf Ranch that time, and I looked at the first wave, and I thought, God, I've never in my life seen a wave in the wild anywhere near that good. And that's just, I found that really defeating and deflating. It kind of meant, for me, it felt like, why would you choose if you were a kid coming up? And just imagine that there were surf ranches sort of everywhere. Like, am I going to go chase down waves and in some country far away, in hopes that it'll get good and the crowd won't be there and I'll get my share and all this, or would I just sign up for a season's pass the way everyone here in Seattle signs up for a season pass at the local ski resort? I feel like it's romantic and adventurous because that was how you had to get waves in the past, and that's no longer the case now. There's two ways to get a great wave, and one of them is 100 times more difficult than the other. So to say to somebody a long time ago, what was the best wave you ever rode? And it came, I'd been surfing for whatever it was, 30 years. And I finally got to go to these islands off of Indonesia and stay on a wooden boat for 10 days and float around. And, and it was amazing. And I know that, the boat trip itself is a little bit of a silver platter thing, right? But you can still it's still pretty easy to get skunked in the Mentwise, and you're still dealing with actual reef, and you're still dealing with other with crowds and with flat spells and with weird weather and sickness and all that. And I flew into whatever it is, Stockton, and drove to Lemoore and or Fresno, I guess it is. And you check into that shitty hotel casino. And the six perfect waves that I was allotted, all 6 of them were better than anything I'd surfed in my whole life. I didn't surf them well. I didn't even make some of them, but just seemed it was disturbing, and I will admit that when my last of my 6 waves was finished, I would have thrown my wallet at whoever was standing on the side of the pool and said, take all my cards and just give me 10 more waves. I really wanted to keep doing it. And that also was disturbing. There was no, so anyway, a quick question on that, if that's all right. How did they react to your story? Because obviously I don't think I don't think I did. I don't know why. I don't even know why I was picked to go on that, because all I had was, I think there was a period where they were just inviting anyone from surf media in to write about it, but I didn't actually have an assignment for anybody. I did a piece on it in EOS, which I don't know how many people saw it. And then I did a bunch of interviews, I think, with Beach Grid and some other people where I said much of what I've just said to you.
Yeah, so, which I think is where I kind of got the gist, But I just... when you look at Kelly's thing, Surf Ranch, whatever you want to call it, it's obviously at the very extreme end of that development in surfing, let's say. Clearly it's unattainable. It's very expensive. Right. As you rightly say, it's in the middle of fucking nowhere. And then here we've got a couple in the UK. We've got one in Wales, We've got one in Bristol, and I've surfed them both. And what was really interesting about that was, so when I went to the one in Wales, one of the things that actually blew my mind was there was Portuguese and Spanish surfers there who'd flown from the Algarve, where obviously there's amazing waves. They'd flown to Liverpool and they'd driven to this wave. And it's all very friendly, obviously. And I was like, oh, where are you boys from? And they said this. I was like, what the fuck are you doing here? Right. And they said, oh, it's our 4th trip. And I was like, you're kidding. Because, everything, me and my friends, we go to Portugal, obviously.
Right,
right. And I was like, well, why? Because I was there to review it for a British newspaper. So obviously I was like, well, this is kind of interesting. Why? And they said, well, it's not crowded and it's mechanical. So we just get to, we get wave after wave after wave. I was like, okay, so that's a usage of this that I certainly didn't foresee. And then there was like an instructor guy who basically was doing a season. He was just using it to get his air reverses down.
Right.
And then I contrast that with Bristol. Now I've actually interviewed Nick, who is the kind of, I don't think visionary is too strong a word because it's been his life's work to get this thing off the ground. And for Nick, from having spoken to him, this is an egalitarian vision of surfing. This is a way of making it accessible. He is a surfer. He's an evangelist. He believes in the power of surfing. He believes all that stuff. And he really sees it as a very positive contribution to surf culture because he sees it as like I say, like a unifying thing. And I think I would definitely position that I think that's a different thing from the surf ranch. Insofar like I don't have an opinion on it. Like I surfed Bristol, it was really good fun. It was great. It was absolutely freezing. It was pretty easy wave to surf.
No, I was all set to go. I was going to go this summer with Mark, my EOS partner. I was looking forward to it.
Right.
And then COVID canceled it. So you're right. I was speaking mostly about surf ranch there just a second ago, and I think that what sort of freaks me out there is that you've literally outdone nature. So what the Waco pool and Bristol and
Surf Snowdonia, like
it doesn't seem like there doesn't seem to be this. It doesn't seem head to head where you look at the surf ranch thing, where you've put up a wave where you've outdone Cape St. Francis from Endless Summer, which is still sort of this standard for the long perfect wave, or you've outdone Kira, or you've outdone,
I actually watched it again recently just to watch that section again. Like exactly like I think with the surf ranch there's almost something. This probably sounds like a ludicrous word to use, but there's almost something kind of like diabolical about it, isn't there?
Right.
The fact that they've made this thing, which is so exemplary, as you say, beyond nature, and then made it so inaccessible.
The access part of it, and the environmental part of it is another thing we haven't talked about. But also, it's like I remember during one of the contests they had, and the idea that a 10-second tube ride is a throwaway score, like just what you've done to this thing that what you've done to this thing that we all like. That's heartbreaking, right? I mean, a 10-second tube. If you could snip that one of those throwaway scores and then put it in a Kai Neville film from 10 years ago, that would be the thing we'd all be talking about. Oh my God, where is that? And it was just a nothing way, like a nothing score on that, and that just seemed. It was just really sad.
The implications of that are they're perplexing, aren't they? Really?
Yeah. So, but it's funny because when I first saw the Waco wave, which, side note, a really good friend of mine from high school, his brother developed the tech for that, Bruce McFarland. So that's the American Wave Company, I think, American Wave Machine Company, whatever it's called. Anyway, Waco, with the way that they were just sort of throwing those two waves together to make the wedge, and that there were three waves coming at a time, and that if you're out there with some friends it looked like mostly just sort of fucking around. Like you paddle back out, there's a lot of waves, and it just seemed like kind of a frenzy. That looked great to me, like that, because that wasn't trying to be Kira or Cape St. Francis. It just was its own weird thing. And
I totally get that. Yeah, because one of the funny things about Bristol is there's a guy in the water who calls you in, which is so odd. You know, you line up, and then there's a guy there, and he goes, right, you go, and it's like you've got. I think you get 2 goes at a wave, because there's a lot of beginners on the waves, a lot of intermediates, fine, whatever, but they're obviously kind of not catching it. So they've had to put this rule in, which is you get 2 goes at it. If you don't catch it, you've got to get out of the way.
Right.
So, but yeah, just the idea that you've got a guy in the water saying, okay, like basically just circumventing the entire idea of a lineup is a very strange experience.
But what you were just inching up on saying there a minute ago, Matt, was, and I'm really, really aware of this, is like, there isn't going to be, I think, a universal take on sort of what surfing should be or what surfing is. I mean, for kids starting surfing now, it's not going to be. I thought there were these sort of core fundamental things about what surfing is, and this is what you were asking me earlier about what I think about as I'm doing sort of surf history. I'm looking for those things that seem to make surfing unique and different, and that's why I sort of spend so much time thinking about this. Like, isn't the difficulty of it, and isn't the knowledge of what it takes to be able to surf well and to surf a lot and to surf many different kinds of ways, like that seems like why the sport is what it is, and that may not be true anymore. That may not be, that the beginning of the end of that way of looking at surfing might have ended the day Kelly dropped that first clip of Surf Ranch, because you've just so shifted the fundamental thing of this, which is waves. You've taken the waves out of the environment that the sport was born in and put into this different thing, and that's going to create a different sport. And maybe there'll be 2 forms of surfing, or I don't know. Again, maybe things will happen that I can't even foresee. I won't lie. Like, there was something when you're looking for silver linings when lockdown started, I was just thinking, God, that's gonna fuck up all of those proposals and all those projects, that are coming down, that were all sort of in the works for wave pools. And if it all got put off for another 10 years, that wouldn't break my heart at all.
Well, I guess my final question, one of the things we've not really talked about is the physical side of surf history. There's obviously a huge market these days in terms of memorabilia and boards and those physical relics. Is that something that I'm sure you must come across it a lot, but is that something that you're engaged in at all?
No, not in the least. In fact, I suppose almost the opposite, because when I get surf magazines, I haven't been collected for a while because I've got kind of most of what I want. But I do this thing that collectors, I think, would tar and feather me for. I get them hardbound, which means I'll take a volume and you send them off to a bookbindery, and they slice off the part of the magazine where, right where they're stapled, and they glue all the magazines together, so you've got a book with 12 issues inside of it, which I think immediately, I don't know if it destroys the value of the magazine, but it greatly reduces them. And I do that because otherwise the magazines disappear and everything. So no, I have zero interest I don't collect boards or magazines or posters or anything like that.
Yeah, because I guess it's quite a growing thing, isn't it? I guess it's part of this sort of story collecting. It's definitely a growing thing. But I'm the same. Like, it's in the kind of, it's just something I've never particularly been that interested in. I almost prefer the stories.
Right.
The kind of, and the imagination, the imaginative side of it that comes with that.
Yeah, and the times that I've been to museum, Surfing Heritage Culture Center and stuff, and we can get your hands on the boards. There's a little something to that, I suppose, but I don't know. At some point, I think it was. This is probably another dumb thing I did, but I think it was 7 or 8 years ago. I took all these journals that I'd kept when I was in my 20s and stuff, and just tossed them all. Like I don't. That's a different thing. I remember just reading these things, going, "Oh my God, what a whining little high school." Like I just sounded like a high schooler, even though I was like 28. Like what a whiny, complaining. I just threw them all away, and I felt great. And my wife will always get on my case, because when we do house cleaning, I'm always the one who is likely to add hugely to the throwaway or the goodwill pile. I just want to sort of clear it all out. But that said, like when it comes down to doing what I do, the further I can go back to get source material. So I'm a paid subscriber to newspaper.com, and I just did a whole run on EOS a couple of months ago where I put up pages for all of the Makaha International Surf Contests, which went from I think 1953 to I think 1972. And for me, it was fascinating to go back and read the Honolulu newspaper accounts of those contests rather than the surf magazine accounts of the contest, because you're finding out, what land developer was the big sponsor of all those events, and to get the non-surfer's perspective on those contests was really interesting, and also to get the view of the event from the day after it happened versus a few weeks after, written from an actual reporter's view. So I have a bottomless thirst for the source material, but I have zero interest in the things, the physical thing. Like I would never want to have the newspapers, or I don't even, even if I could get rid of all these magazines that I have here on my shelves and have everything scanned, that would be fine. But I can't do that. So, yeah.
Yeah. I often wonder if collecting is just about an imagined life as well. The life that you would like to have, but probably, like I've collected books my whole life, and yes, they're kind of in boxes in the roof. My wife's always like, "What are you going to do with those?"
Right.
it's like, oh yeah, so when we get the library,
right.
And she's always like, "Yeah, we're never going to have the library."
My wife's the same. My wife collects first editions of old books, and I don't know. I suppose I don't know where that comes from. I certainly really value and love all the old photos I've got from my life, and I've got my mom died a couple of years ago, and I got all the old family photo albums that are right behind me, and I guess now I'm going to counter what I just said a second ago, because I love having those in the albums and not in the. I haven't digitized them yet, and there is something to the smell of the paper and how fragile it. I suppose just how fragile it is. Where it means a lot to me that you have to treat it really carefully. And whenever I open those albums up, it's the photos themselves, and it's also somehow the physical bit of it, everything sort of turning yellow and getting ripped up at the edges. I like all of that, or I don't know if I like it all, but it all means something to me, even if I can't really define what it means. But it wouldn't be the same if it was on my MacBook Pro here.
Yeah, no, that's true. But you said you got rid of your records.
I did. I was telling you earlier, when I moved, I kept moving. I moved from San Clemente up to Oakland, and then back to LA, and then back to San Francisco. And by the time I got back to San Francisco, this was all within like 3 years. I was so tired of lugging all my LPs around in these crates, and most of the stuff I'd already gotten replaced on CD or something. And I just had an afternoon once, and I drove to the dump and literally flung all of my LPs I've been collecting since I was a kid off into the dump. And it felt, again, it felt so good But there was a point later where I thought, God, I could have probably at least sold them or something. But I don't know. I've never kept old surfboards. I like just flushing it all out. So if I had those LPs, I would have just sold them, and it would have been a few $100 in my pocket or something. But no big deal. I'm not too attached to any of that stuff.
Yeah. So do you think when it lifts, you're still going to plan a trip? You said you were planning a trip over here, maybe? Is that still?
Well, yeah. So there's a couple of things. The return of my cold water surfing days. I think I'm going to keep that up because, again, partly like I say, my friend Jeremy makes it so easy. He swings by and picks me up, and I'm a big soft palmed. Like Jeremy goes out and fishes, and he catches crabs, and he does all this stuff, and I've never been any kind of an outdoorsman or everything, and so I get I get really well taken care of, and like here's your board, Matt, and he I get out of the water and he unzips me and he hands me a flask of whiskey and da da da. So it's like I'm sort of almost like this special case that he has to look this hothouse flower that he takes care of. So I can't not do that, and so I'm going to keep surfing up here a little bit. I definitely want to keep as soon as I get my vaccine. As soon as I get my vaccine, I'm going to go somewhere warm and spend a week. And when I do those trips, early on when Teddy was born, we did a couple of trips, family trips, where it was like combined family and surf, and they were just disastrous. Like I wasn't surfing well because I was thinking about Jody and Teddy, and then when I was with them, I really wanted to be surfing. So we've done family trips, and I've done a few surf trips, and I want to go, by myself and just be as selfish as I was before I got married. So I do want to get my vaccine and go somewhere warm and surf some gentle waves, and hope I can get that one spot like I was talking about earlier, where I can still glide and do a turn and kick out and feel good about my standing. I want to just sort of keep my good standing in the world of the active surfer. And then definitely all this time I just turned 60 and I've never been to the UK, which is ridiculous. And
oh wow,
I know.
Really?
So never.
You got to come over.
I know, no doubt. And again, like part of and just completely going against what I said a minute ago about the wave pool, but like Mark's been to the Bristol pool like 3 times and he's had a blast, and he said, I'm going to get a few of my friends and we're going to, he lives not far from there, and we're going to just go, sign up for a morning or an afternoon session at the pool. And I was really looking forward to that. I just wanted to get in the water with Mark and fuck around and see how it goes. So more travel for sure. And that actually is going to be a trip I'm going to do with Jody and Teddy, because Teddy hasn't been to the UK either. So that'll happen, maybe this time next year. I'm sorry, Matt, where are you? What part? Where are you?
I'm in Brighton. I'm on the south coast.
That's so funny.
So we are like an hour south of London.
It's so funny because for the first, I've known Mark for I think 3 or 4 years, and up until just about 6 months ago, I kept saying that he lived in Brighton because I got Brighton and Bristol confused because they both start with B, so why not, right? And he finally gently.
Yeah, well, they're quite similar. They're both sort of, anti-establishment little hotbeds, Brighton and Bristol.
All right.
So.
Well, I'd love to go see both. And again, we're going to have a car and we're going to be driving around, and anything anything there is going to fascinate me because I haven't been. So I hope this time next year.
Well, please look me up. I mean, I'd love to catch up in person, and love to. I mean, I was going to say take you surfing here, but I'm not. Not sure that. Maybe go for a pint. That might. Yeah, no, that's make more sense.
It's what I do. Yeah, it's like people come visit me. I said we're gonna. I live in Seattle, so we have to go get coffee somewhere, and I absolutely will drink every pint that's placed in front of me when I'm on that trip. Yeah, so.
Hopefully the pubs will be open again by then. Although actually the pubs open at the time of recording in 3 days, and it's you know, us British have quite a unique relationship to the pub. So the press are calling it Super Saturday, and I think every emergency department of every hospital in the country is on standby. So because I think the country's going to get pretty drunk on Saturday.
Well, the big reopening that we've done here over the past 2 or 3 months, which, as you know, has just done a fucking U-turn and everything. You know, the cases are spiking, but a lot of that, they're saying, has to do with you youngsters, and I mean all you people like 45 and under, just flocking to the bars, right? And everyone's doing what they do at bars, and they're getting drunk, and they're talking too close to each other. And so I think that I'll take my pint outdoors.
I think that's my plan. I'm going to give it a few more weeks. Well, Matt, thank you so much. I mean, what a pleasure. So very quickly, so if people want to find out more, give me the pitch. Where should they go?
Just eos.surf, and there's a subscription page, and there's a donation page, and you can actually see quite a bit of the site without being a subscriber, just by clicking on any one of the images on the homepage, and give it a spin. And actually, anyone who signs up gets 2 free weeks anyway. So
great.
What the hell?
Well, I'll put it all in the show notes, and make sure everyone can find it. But thank you so much for taking the time. That was a real treat.
I really
look forward to that.
I really enjoyed it, man. And I'll see you in Brighton this time next year.
Yeah, definitely.
Take care, Matt.
So there you go. That was me and Matt Warshaw. Hope you enjoyed it. I think that's a really nice companion piece to the Lauryn Hill episode, that. And I find Matt's thoughts on surf history and how recent developments like wave pools affect that a fascinating topic. As you probably gathered, I didn't completely agree with a lot of what Matt was saying, but you know, that's the name of the game, isn't it? Hearing different perspectives and trying to understand different viewpoints. And obviously Matt is coming at this from a place of some authority. So I found that a really fascinating conversation, and I'm very, very grateful to Matt for taking the time and for coming on the show with such generosity. I've been thinking about all this a lot in the last few weeks, partly because I'm writing about California and my own relationship to it for the forthcoming Looking Sideways book, and also because of the way the wider conversation's been going in the last few weeks, especially when it comes to the question, which stories should we actually be covering and giving a platform to? It's something that I chatted to Lauren about during our conversation. And it sounds ridiculous given how I've been making such choices my entire working life, but I think I'm only just beginning to truly understand the power these choices have in shaping our collective perceptions and history, and how that belated realization is yet another manifestation of the privilege that is extant everywhere. And it's another example of the type of lazy assumption I've covered a fair bit in the last few episodes, because it isn't just about the choices that you make, it's also about acquiescing to those choices as an observer as well, and also the choices that you don't make. Now, it doesn't matter what the topic, whether British history, something I've been reading about a lot recently, or surfing, every editorial or narrative decision you make helps to either underline or challenge a prevailing point of view. And there's power in that decision making and in these platforms, and there's a responsibility in those choices. Now, in that way, I find it fascinating really in hearing how guests such as Lauren or Matt make their choices and what those choices say about the culture, especially when you consider how quickly they lead to positions and viewpoints becoming entrenched and hence gospel, really. Like I say, it's just something that I've been thinking about a lot over the last few weeks, particularly in relation to the Looking Sideways California book, because I realised there's a story that exists about California and its influence on action sports culture that is just completely accepted. And it's certainly been a huge influence on my life. And one of the revelations of my trip to California was, despite dedicating my life to that culture and the pursuit of this kind of idealized lifestyle and the ideals that are epitomized by that state, it actually has nothing to do with me. And it's something that I didn't really find that attractive or appealing when I was there. And it's something that me and Mikey Lay chatted about in our conversation a few months back, something that he said he'd experienced as a professional longboarder entering that kind of California scene. And I just think it's a bit of an interesting lens through which to look at this whole conversation. Like I say, something that I've been exploring while I've been writing this book and putting this book together. It's been fascinating thinking about it, and also thinking about it in terms of the podcast and which guests I'm going to invite onto the show in future months. And I think that's generally one of the most positive aspects of the entire conversation in the last few months. You can see that shift happening in real time. You can see those choices being made, and you can see different choices being made. And that's only after a few weeks, really. And it's just really exciting to think about what's going to happen to the culture as more and more of these less canonical stories and voices are given a platform. And, you know, we move away from this kind of Californian hegemony in this patriarchy, which is a term that Leo Baker, a future or maybe past guest, not sure when that one's going to come out, so I'm going to hedge my bets there. That's a phrase that Leo used in our conversation, and I think is a pretty apt one, really. So yeah, looking forward to seeing what changes happen in the future and what contributions I can make to that, really. All right, that's enough for this one. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed it. Bit of an epic, that one. I think we're on a couple of hours at this point. Thank you again to Matt for coming on the show. Very much looking forward to that beer when this is all done and dusted. Nice one.